Hey everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm John Kennedy.
And today I am wearing my Indian wedding jacket picked up in New Delhi because today we're all going to a wedding. We're going to the wedding at Cana of Galilee. This is John, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out, and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Okay, I have to say, I love this passage. I think it's the most underrated passage in the New Testament. And it's no JV miracle. And even the likes of the great Raymond Brown, a commentator on this, known to all those who are really into it, would know. Mm-hmm. He calls it the most unusual miracle in the New Testament. And so we have here, Jesus making a statement. This is like a presidential address. He is announcing the Messianic age in this deal. So this has to be the first miracle in John's gospel.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, all the more because it is the first miracle and because there's no mention of it anywhere else in the other gospels, which might contribute somewhat to its underrated status, that it's only here. But yeah, this is the new wine of the Messianic age. And we get this symbolism in the Old Testament when you have in Amos a looking forward towards this Messianic age of prosperity and justice and peace and shalom on the earth, and wine is one of the images and elements of that, and you get that throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. So Jesus is sort of, I don't know, laying down the gauntlet is the best way to put it, but compared with the gospel we just finished traveling through, Advent aside, Mark, which is all about the Messianic secret, there's no secret here. Mm-hmm. There's no secret.
That's a good call. That's a good call. We're in just the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you two. And I think if you look at all the writings of the author of this gospel that we suppose is also the author of the Revelation to John and the letters to John, or of John, the overarching theme is one of like pointing us towards the great feast, the eschatological joyful festival, which is a wedding, and as you said, it's foreshadowed in the prophets and Amos and in Isaiah, and wine, being this symbol of restoration and, the ultimate restoration to this new age that will be like a feast. So, I'm not surprised that it's not in the other Gospels, just because the Johannine Gospel is so archetypal. It's so, it's about joy and feasting, and these, the things we call miracles are here clues or signs to what Jesus is about, his mission and identity. And so, everything, this is being the first, it's like, of course it's at a wedding, because that's the whole goal, is to get to a wedding. Let's get to the feast. And in a way, there is a secret here, because he does it in the back room with all the servants. And, his mother kind of gets him into it. He doesn't really want to make a big show. But it's also kind of a theme that he goes to the lowest first, and it fills from the bottom up.
Oh, wow. Those are some really good points there that I never much thought about. I was still stuck on wine, and the sign of wine in Isaiah 24, where the impending judgment is coming, and they need a Messiah. It says, the wine dries up, the vine languishes, all the merry-hearted sigh. No longer do they drink wine with singing. There is an outcry in the streets for lack of wine. All joy has reached its eventide. The gladness of the earth is banished. And so, here we have no wine, no God. And then in Isaiah 25, the prophetic vision of God providing a Messiah, we hear, on this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. That this wine thing is a lot more than perhaps we bring to it. This is a sign of the new messianic time.
That Isaiah was so into wine that he mentions it twice, and well-aged twice.
Well-aged, yeah. And then Isaiah 55, he says, "Come buy wine without price and without money. Without money, without price."
Yeah, that's good too. I mean, this is no Manischewitz. No offense to Manischewitz wine. This is the best of the best.
Right. Yeah. I got to say that our Southern Baptists and other teetotaling denominations, I don't know what they do with all this.
Oh, well, I saw something on YouTube that made me laugh. When I was looking into this, something popped up, and it was two pastors talking, and the title of it was something like, "Did Jesus make alcoholic wine?"
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a cultural appropriation, or cultural lay on of something.
Just a reminder that every denomination struggles with the scriptures in different ways for different reasons.
Episcopalians don't struggle with this portion of the scriptures. Maybe other portions, of course.
But so we're talking, of course, about wine, but the signs as well. And interesting here just what John refers to Jesus's miracles as. This has come up, of course, on the pod before, but being that this is the first sign and that we're back to John after some time away from it, might be worth getting into. And I mean, first of all, I did a word search for miracles in the Bible, and the word does come up a fair amount in the Old Testament, a little bit in the New Testament, 0 times in the Gospels. So Jesus, of course, works what we call miracles, but they're called different things in the Gospels. And a favored term in the Synoptics is the Greek dynamis, translated acts of power, the idea that Jesus is establishing the kingdom of God in some way with these acts of power. Yeah. John doesn't talk about it that way. He calls what Jesus does in this way either signs or works, and they're both echoing the actions of God in, particularly in the Exodus narrative, and in what is clearly a deliberate way. So works is used of what God does in delivering the Israelites from slavery in the Exodus, and the same narratives and the same reflections back on those narratives from later books such as Deuteronomy talk about the signs that God did through Moses. And I think from Raymond Brown, I was just looking into this a bit, and that in the Old Testament context, works expresses sort of the divine perspective on what is accomplished, that God, it has a unique perspective on just what the significance is, what is being built, what is being accomplished through these miracles, through these signs. And signs sort of indicates the human viewpoint, and directs attention from the sign or miracle itself to what it points to or reveals, right? And we're in Epiphany season, and Epiphany is all about the revelation of who Jesus is. And in John, these works, these signs reveal, this word is used at the end of the passage here, that Jesus did the first of his signs in Cana and revealed his glory, and disciples believed. They reveal who Jesus is, what his purpose is. They reveal his glory and his relation to the Father. So this very key theme throughout John is being set up here. And it's similar to how it's conceived and talked about in the Synoptics, but he has very much his own particular lens on it.
Yeah, incredibly so. I mean, do you want to have a word about that? I have a thought on that too.
But just a short word to say that, signs is a good word in John, because the people in John probably also, like we do, get very caught up in each sign and think, it's so great, do more, let's have more. And we want to figure out how it happened, and, was it alcoholic or not? We get really drilled down on the details, and Jesus is like, look to what the sign is pointing you to. You know, don't stop at the sign and ooh and ah over it, get to the destination. And he, you know, I think that that's what all the signs in John have in mind, is it's not only about his identity, it's about his mission and his where he wants to take us to. You know, in John, it's what to do in response to this great abundance, this great offer of lavishness.
Yeah, that's both of these things well said. I just would add that in Mark's gospel, 200 of the 475 verses are miracles, we call miracles. Mm-hmm. And in John, we have 7 of these things. And in the synoptic miracles, so often, or what we call miracles, so often we have, I mean, he stills the storm, he casts out the demon and the exorcist, and pigs fling themselves over the cliff, and all kinds of things happen. The lame walk. And here we have something that is, you know, so subtle and nuanced that they don't, you know, this happens, as you were saying, nearly in a secret way. Yeah. But that these in the synoptics, with synoptic miraculous eyes, we see the kingdom breaking in. But with John, we have it's nuanced, but it's very different. You already said it. And you did too. It's about the identity of Jesus. Who is Jesus? Because in Jesus is where the Messianic age is. And these things each set up a theological dissertation. I mean, the sign leads to theology. And in the other, and in Mark, it's like bang, 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 sign, 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 miracle, miracle, miracle. But there isn't the long theological discourse about what does this mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, that's very much how John is structured. You get sign, discourse, roughly speaking, through the first so-called book of signs in John. John is commonly broken up into a prologue, which we looked at recently during Christmastide, and then the book of signs running through the end of chapter 12, I think, and then the rest of it, besides the epilogue at the very end, known as the book of glory. And yeah, as has been said, right, like John really focuses on just a few signs that have particular, perhaps symbolic significance. And the number of signs is, of course, correlated to the days of creation. There are 7 signs, 7 days of creation. The 8th sign would be the resurrection, which sort of completes the cycle and begins a new creation. Mm-hmm. So whereas the 8th day, exactly, the synoptic framework, as we've said, is the inbreaking and establishment of the kingdom of God. In John, that language is hardly present at all, and it's a related theme, but it's a different one of new creation. And Jesus as sort of the creator of the new creation, if you will, being the Word who is introduced in the prologue, nice. The one through whom God made the world and the one through whom God is remaking the world, and ushering in the sort of messianic age of wine. Though it's still probably best not to drink it until 5 o'clock. Well, I'm rewatching Mad Men right now, and they do not wait until 5 o'clock. Oh,
but I worked in advertising for 3 years. I saw a lot of that, not waiting until 5 o'clock. I want to come back to something you said early on, which I think is interesting. When we read the whole Johannine, all of the gospel, the letters, and the book of Revelation, and we read it as a vision, a godly vision. And here we get Jesus as the bridegroom, and that in the text today, when Mary, when his mother says, we need more wine, and we learn from the text that it's the bridegroom's job to supply the wine, which is unlike a wedding nowadays. It's the bridegroom's job here, and that Jesus becomes the role of the bridegroom. And so now we have Jesus inserted into that key place in the symbolic scriptures that you're talking about, where the bridegroom is the one who brings the messianic age.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. I'm also interested in how he addresses his mother as woman, and she only appears twice in the whole gospel here and at the foot of the cross, and is both times called woman. And one commentator, Gil Bailey, who I love to read, he suggests that John is using woman as wisdom, the Hebrew archetypal female wisdom. And, Jesus is the son of wisdom, and wisdom is telling him now is the time, and then at the end of the gospel, he presents woman to John, let wisdom be your mother, and I love that.
Wow, I really like that.
I really loved that. So it's just one little tidbit, given that, here's Jesus the bridegroom and we get wisdom as mother.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's
I
all
hadn't
new to me.
either.
That's all new to me.
I thought it was really helpful.
I've heard sort of theological takes on the significance of Mary and John, given that she only appears twice and that she's not even named. Catholics are trying to make more out of the little bit of Mary and John, and there's a lot to make more of, but I hadn't heard that, which I really do like. And indeed, wisdom is such an important theme in John's gospel, going back to our recent conversation about John's prologue. Even though the word wisdom doesn't appear in the prologue, the sort of philosophical word or concept, because obviously wisdom has to do with philosophy, given that philosophy literally means the love of wisdom, is logos. But the way that John uses logos and describes who this logos is and what he does, it's echoing very clearly the Jewish wisdom literature, speaking precisely of wisdom, which is always personified as female, whether it's in Proverbs or the Wisdom of Solomon or the Book of Sirach. Wisdom is feminine, is sort of divine feminine in some very mysterious way, and just really beautiful and astonishing given the patriarchal world that these texts and these ideas emerge from. Really, really compelling. And so, just to sort of harken back to a couple of Old Testament texts about wisdom that seem echoed, at least in spirit, if not literal concepts and language, in today's passage. In Proverbs 9, it says, "You that are simple, turn in here. To those without sense, wisdom says, 'Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed.'" And you get similar ideas in Sirach about honey rather than wine, but this eating and drinking imagery, that wisdom is a feast, that it is pleasing, that it's not only sustaining, but it's pleasant in some way. And I love that connection to Mary, and that how she functions here, I think, is similar to how a lot of whether they're Catholics or just Christians with a devotion to Mary, experience her and understand her. She brings the request of the servants, right? It's the servants who present the problem that the wine is run out, and or whoever it is at the wedding, and she brings the request to Jesus, and similarly, I think a lot of people feel that there's something about Mary that sort of channels the desires and concerns and thoughts of our heart to God in a particular way. It's not as though we don't have access apart from Mary, obviously, but nonetheless, given our limitations and so on, and our needs and our imaging of Mary and our imaging of the divine, that she sort of, for a lot of people, maybe opens our heart to the heart of God in some mysterious way, but nonetheless, she's a very powerful channel for prayer, and she is in the story.
Yeah, that's
too.
nice. Yeah, I mean, if you just take a look at the iconography in the Orthodox tradition, oftentimes you see Mary holding an adult baby, right? A Jesus with a beard, and she's pointing toward him. Her hand is always pointing toward him. Yeah. But I want to circle back to the text here 1 second. Again, I love the Sophia allusions here, but just I think it's important for us to understand that the scriptures are, they're written in antiquity, and we have people speaking Aramaic in a Hebrew context that gets translated into Greek, which then gets translated many, many, many times into English. And so phrases that would be used in Jesus' day, transliterated all this through, can get all kinds of tangled. And one of those words is woman, which sounds to us gruff and impolite. And that the commentators say, no, there's nothing impolite here. I mean, Jesus calls, it's the woman at the well, he addresses as woman, and the woman caught in adultery addresses as woman, addresses his mother as woman. I called my mother mom. Ma, hey ma, but that Jesus is not being rude, and so to make sure the tone in this is Hebrew, Hebrew mom and Hebrew son here, having a little conversation here.
Yeah. An interesting thing, though, is at least according to what I read, is that this form of address, woman, is respectful and doesn't sound the way it doesn't mean what it might sound like it means in terms of its apparent gruffness to us, but that it is unattested to otherwise as a way of referring to one's own mother, and so may speak somewhat to how Jesus obviously was like us. He was human, fully human. But he was different, right? And you can imagine that maybe he had a slightly different relationship to his earthly parents. That being, that at this point,
I would like to suggest that I think John's written late enough in the early church years that they had time to develop these senses of the roles everyone was playing for Jesus, and they had a much more developed sense of Christology and, Jesus' set apartness and all that. John doesn't include any birth narrative apart from the prologue, the cosmic prologue. And I feel like John's use of the word woman here is more archetypal. I think John is an archetypal image maker. And, anchoring the beginning and end of the gospel with her appearance at these important places, the beginning and the very end of his earthly passage, has its function all its own, apart from what Jesus really might have said to his mother. I mean, I doubt he walked around grand dame of my life, or anything like that. I don't think he did anything weird like that. I mean, as a human, maybe, but I mean, the Gospels are all so different, and there isn't a lot of interaction between him and his mother in any of the Gospels. And in Mark, he is downright rude. He's like, who is that? My mother and sisters and brothers are those who do my will. I mean, he is gruff in other places, but I think that each Gospel writer has their purpose. And as we've said, they're not writing history books or journalistic articles. They're writing wisdom writings to instruct and guide a community into the greater life of Christ. And I think he has a purpose in his way of storytelling.
Yeah, interesting. Really, I mean, this is the sort of thing we could spend a lot of time on, and Rob's going to keep holding up the sign, tell us to move on. But, these are theographies, as I've said in the past. And what you say, I mean, when I get this news about Jesus as a family man, it's not true at all. He rejects his family, but interestingly, his family comes back. His brother James and his leadership in the church in Jerusalem here. And also, with the writing of John's gospel, many of the scholars believe that John at least knew of Mark, maybe Luke, but at least of Mark. Thought he, as they say at the El Divinity School podcast, which I recommend all of you, on John's gospel. I can't remember one of these guys said, I can't just call these guys Professor Bartlett. He was my professor. Said that John thought he could do a better job than this, and that John's gospel. It's like it's theology. He's a Jungian psychologist too, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all that deep archetypal stuff in there, and that's why you can never ever, regardless of how long the podcast is or how many volumes Raymond Brown writes, you can never ever exhaust what's happening in these Gospels. And I want to shift here a little bit, if you don't mind. I just think also one of the things that the imagery that we take, I think Mark's Gospel has, I'm in St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut here with my compatriots and Rob behind here. I think Mark has an overly powerful influence in our understanding of Jesus, because Mark's gospel, the first one, gets embedded in these other two, in Luke and Matthew. And so Mark's take on it has, can I dare say, too strong a voice, that there are other voices that are possible. And that's why we need John, because John is the other voice that isn't so consumed by the Markan voice. It's certainly there, but where do we get that? I mean, what John's gospel is trying to say here is that Jesus is Lord of the feast. And he is the one that brings the feast, that the divine being is light, life, and love, like we hear about in the prologue. And even the crucifixion is seen in light and not darkness. And yet so much of our take on Christianity is this shadow of darkness over everything. And, sometimes certain pieties make that stronger than the light of the resurrection, in the history of Christianity. But in John's gospel, we get this whole thing. He's the master of the banquet. He's the steward of divine good times, that there is light, life, and love. And the wedding feast is showing this. I wish that we had churches dedicated to the wedding feast and wedding feasts. I mean, why all of our churches are dedicated to people who were martyred and murdered, and not to denigrate that, but I'm just saying there are other images of the divine being which I think are full of the life that all of our souls are dying to live. We are born in the image of God to live this life, and life is hard for sure, but the wedding banquet, the wedding feast, that's the glasses we should be putting on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you significantly, but the but for me is embedded in what you said, that our churches are named after martyrs who were martyred precisely because of how the world responded to them.
Good call.
Who were martyred because of how the world responded to this invitation, and that is at least as much, I wouldn't say more, but as much of a theme in John as, I'll definitely allow that the light coming into the world is the great theme, but closely followed by the world's rejection of the light. I finished a book group here on Thomas Merton's kind of thoughts on the early 60s. His penetrating insight, given that he was somebody who had some distance from our world and its madness, and the space to think about it, and obviously a lot of time to read and reflect, the way that he saw apparently sort of innocuous elements of our cultural life, our consumerism, the stories we tell ourselves, our myth about what it means to be American and so on, that these are profoundly dysfunctional and dangerous and wreak havoc. And he was really wound up about nuclear weapons, and that hasn't really changed in terms of the threat it poses. And so there's such a sort of a both-andness to me in how I understand all of this in relation to the world we live in, that yes, there's incredible joy on offer, that the life of God is one of joy, that any joy we experience, true joy, is a reflection of the being of God, is a participation in the being of God. But there's a lot within us that hinders it, and it's not the typical construals of sin so prevalent in Christian history and in what is preached in so many Christian churches today. But nonetheless, there is this turning inward. This is sort of an Augustinian theme, obviously based on the scriptures, that not only keeps us on the outside of this incredible wedding feast, but also kind of keeps others from it too. But I'm all for having churches of the wedding feast. Don't get me wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what we're referring to here in the sort of misadventures of church shaping and naming and stuff, and is the water that's running out. People. Brian Zand, this great Midwestern pastor who's alive and well and working in Minnesota, he writes about, he's a former evangelical who, I guess he still might call himself an evangelical, but he's had a conversion that he writes about in a book called Water into Wine, Part of My Story, he calls it. And he uses this story as his, the kind of framework for his conversion, that everything he'd built his life around, everything he'd been preaching to his megachurch about was like empty jars. It started to feel like empty jars. And he really needed something, and he couldn't figure it out. And then he saw something new about Jesus that was so undeniable that he had to change everything. He had to walk away. Everything was destroyed under him. And he couldn't get enough, though. It was just this new way of viewing Jesus and what his mission was in the world. And it was his new wine, like pouring out of him. And I thought that was a great take on this gospel, that we all have a lot of water that's running dry in our rote, these we never even got to the jars, but the purification jars they're not just like the Jewish purification rites for us. They can stand for any kind of rote ritual that we hold people to, or rote idea of us and them that we hold on to, that's just running dry in our culture and in our way of being Christian. So I think that's one helpful way, is that both Mark and John are not influential enough. The road of discipleship, seeking out the least, the last, the lost, and bringing everyone into the feast. It's both things that. To have the real wedding feast, it requires the road of discipleship, the hard, dark road, and bringing everybody along. And so, each gospel gives us something that we fall short of. That's. So I agree with you that John, is underemphasized, but we're not really ready for the feast unless we're ready to bring everybody.
Yeah. Oh, that's totally true.
Oh, but I just want to say, because I know we need to land the plane, I really appreciate your response to me and my passion, and your response too. And I'm nodding like I learn. Yes. This is all nuanced stuff, and I wasn't trying to denigrate martyrs here. What I was trying to do was unleash joy.
I think that was a great lid to open on the topic.
Yeah, that's the thing that's me, and a little bit of what you're talking about here. Jesus says in chapter 11 that he's come that we might have joy and have it abundantly, abundance. And then at the Last Supper, he says that what does he give us? He gives us his joy. Yeah. And I guess what I get here is what we get over and over and over is he gives us his cross. When do we ever get that he gives us his joy? Yeah, and we have a cross-filled, depressed world. And what is the gospel? The gospel is to bring joy to a depressed world. And we cannot become ministers of joy unless we experience joy. This is all the Thich Nhat Hanh stuff. The best, the best way to make peace is to become peace. And I think that what the gospel is trying to do is trying to make a wedding feast within us so that we can feed others out of the messianic banquet. That's what the thing is going on. That's what it's about. And it's not to denigrate that, right from the prologue, which you did such a nice job with when we had that podcast about the light. The darkness didn't receive the light and all that stuff. Of course, it's in the. I just feel like this stuff is underemphasized.
I
agree with you too.
Merton, for all of his critiquing of the world and all of his suspicion of it, which was profound, also wrote about joy. And he had this beautiful passage commenting on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who of course knew a lot about the darkness of the world. He died at its hands. He died at the hands of the Nazis. Both of them shared this attitude, this sentiment that who but the Christian can devote themselves with an easy conscience to like music and friends and art and like apparently useless things in life. Because if you're merely caught up in like being ethical or trying to be moral, you'll be just concerned of like with am I fulfilling the Kantian imperative? Am I being responsible? And it's just this clenched, rigid way of being. And that Christianity, properly understood and received, is about living the life of God, which obviously has a lot to do with ethics, but it also has a lot to do with just joy and apparently useless things. Arthur Brooks, the happiness columnist in The Atlantic, has a great piece out right now called "Real Friends Are Useless." Not that we shouldn't have them, but that the sign of real friendship is that they don't like give anything to us in a transactional way. It's not practical. It's just joy. So right on. Yeah.
Wow. Really interesting. And I know we're a little bit longer than we usually are. It's just because it just is. This stuff is just endlessly good. We are very, very grateful to you for hanging in here with us, if you're still with us. And we love it when you subscribe and you send us a comment. And also one final comment that behind what you see is Christmas. At St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, we're doing this podcast ahead of time for reasons of our changing schedules. So it is Epiphany and not Christmas, regardless of the symbols that you see behind us. Anyway, God bless you. Peace be with you. And may the wedding feast just burst into your life.